Good afternoon. This is Dr. Jim Weldon, Yogati, speaking to you from Heavenly Mountain Community, a community devoted towards developing higher consciousness, located in Boone, North Carolina. And this is an ongoing discussion of a book that I completed called The Secret Journey to the Enlightened Mind, a sharing of my personal experiences in the direction of living a more enlightened life. So this is episode number 21 from chapter 13 of the book. It's the third part from that chapter, discussing today about the need for both experience and knowledge. You know, experience and knowledge go hand in hand. There's the old analogy of 2 or 3 blind men coming into contact with an elephant for the first time. And one of the blind men ends up on one end and grabs the tail and says, yes, an elephant is like a snake, long and thin. And another of the blind men comes to a leg, puts his arms around it, say, no, the elephant is not like a snake, it's like a tree. See, it's round and it's rough. And the third blind man touches the side of the elephant and said, no, that's not true. It's all of you are completely wrong. The elephant is like a mountain. And so without the ability to see fully the entire picture, all 3 of them are correct and also incorrect. This, of course, has been the problem of spiritual growth and understanding in our world. In a lot of cases, some of those divisions have caused a lot of problems, because ultimately we are seeking the same thing: a state of happiness, joy, insight, connectedness that doesn't come and doesn't go. A sustained happiness beyond daily happiness, a state of fulfillment, you would say. And so the book that I wrote, The Secret Journey to the Enlightened Mind, I am the first person to admit is a bit heavy on the experiential side. And I wrote it just because these were things that I was passing through. And I think it's important for all of us who are seeking a higher life, whatever you care to call it, to understand that most of our perspectives about the higher life are just like this story of the 3 blind men finding an elephant. And only one who has seen the entire picture really will know that this is a complete view. So in my book, I've shared many things that I passed through. And I'm the first to admit the individual experiences don't give a full picture of the possibility of human consciousness and what I believe we're all heading to. This state of the realization of the deep inner being, I call it the enlightened mind, I actually believe is the next natural state of human evolution. I say natural and the next natural state. It's something which we are all heading to, and all of us, through whatever experiences we might have, are seeing a partial vision of that. But in the same way as our analogy about the elephant and the three blind men, one seeing it as a snake, one seeing it as a tree, one seeing it as a mountain, immovable, all of them are correct in a way, but only one who is able to step back with the higher perspective is able to see the entire vision of that. And that's why it's really important. In the last chapter, I was feeling a lot of distress because what I had seen, I wasn't able to recapture in a clear way. So knowledge and experience go hand in hand. Each one of those without the other leads into dangerous traps. So some inner experience, some intuition, some whatever state of joy, you may think that that is a completed state. And I'm the first to say that, now after many years following this, all of those were on the way, good indications, but not a completion. So I just passed through some very intense experiences. How do you know what's real and what's not real? One of the ways to do this is to go back to the wise men of the past. And I had been given a insight, a gift, if you will, called pragya, ritambara, the ability to see and perceive the truth. But now we're 20 years down the road, and that is still a process. Now, at the time that I'm talking about in the book, that's a process underway. So I picked up a book here at this time in my life called the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, a very great series of works with many detailed accounts of many advanced states of consciousness. And I had picked it up over 20 years ago and saw how it describes bringing the mind into stillness. And when the mind comes to the deep inner stillness, the inner dimension of the self begins to be revealed. And gradually over time, as one becomes acquainted with that at first dark space, empty space, the characters of that inner being begin to become clearer. And the mind is absorbed into that automatically. You can't try to make it happen. And this yogi, a rishi, lived in the 3rd century, explained self-realization. He said that the practice of yoga, such as postures, meditation, breathing, create the mental stillness. And through these methods, the mind and the intellect becomes purified. The instruments of knowing become clear. Right now, they're covered by, they may be affected by a lot of things. What you had for lunch, what somebody said to you, maybe even days ago, weeks ago, years ago. And these insights in the mind, which the mind becomes clarified, have been talked about as cities or capabilities that are beyond the normal ability to know. And the natural outcome, not the end, of this purification of the mind. And it can take a significant amount of times. Please be patient with yourself. That is certainly one of the hardest experiences that I learned. And as the deepest impressions in the mind are released, even those that are created by the intense experiences of the divine, those can be an obstacle. You wouldn't think that the experience of happiness could be an obstacle. Well, look at any addict. They're addicted to a blissful state, obviously not a natural one. And that becomes the goal. Okay. So even overcoming those is a stage that one is not bound by whatever intense experiences that you've gone through. And I've explained some of them that I passed through. And I have to admit, now knowing they could so easily have become, it's so easy to have something and then all of a sudden just proclaim, okay, this is it. Be careful, my friends. So even the experience of the divine, where we merge in greater and greater degrees with the infinite, can actually be an obstacle. Real freedom is what we're seeking. So there are many stages to this consciousness that come and go on the way to the highest awareness and the final highest freedom they talk about is beyond any and all attainments, even a sense of all-knowingness, which we'll talk about later. Pretty advanced capabilities, I think we all have to admit. All-knowingness. As I'm reading on in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, I really can't believe my eyes. Because after 20 years, I read it 20 years ago, I didn't have the faintest idea, really, although I thought that I knew at that time. See, it's so easy to think that's the case. And in this book, they're described extensively in the Yoga Sutras. All these years, I had a translation of the work. I had read it, I thought I understood it, and I set it aside on the shelf. And like all of our books, the knowledge that we read in those tomes, one of a famous saying of the Maharishi is the knowledge in the book stays in the books. And the knowledge ultimately is structured in the awareness and the consciousness of the knower, both with experience and deep, profound, direct knowledge. So it was true that I had something extraordinary that had happened to me by this, at this date, this very, very mysterious being so long ago. And it had been waiting for me to develop the understanding, at least another higher level of understanding of what I've been given. So the first chapter in the Yoga Sutra is one on concentration of the mind, outlines the steps leading to the realization of the self or the effulgence of godliness and more. It said that the fruit of these practices and other practices of yoga is samadhi. Sama, evenness, di, having, knowing, being in a possession of, is ultimately the blissful absorption into the greater dimension of the inner self, which is absolutely blissful. And that blissfulness grows far beyond what we would normally conceive of even possible. Over time in meditation, our awareness penetrates some of the mysteries of the subtle universe layer by layer, and the intensity of experience gradually increases. In verse 45, it says that subtlety of experience, samadhi, sama, evenness, di, having, knowing, that ends in the experience of alinga, beyond that which is beyond the highest bubble of the self, actually, alinga. Linga is a whole nother topic, which I also will talk about, actually in the next book. Alinga, or the unmanifested absolute. In verse 47, Patanjali describes what is proficiency in samadhi, oneness with the divine. In this state is one of what they call the seedless awarenesses, beyond all objects, and the gradual experience of that and loss of that, coming in and out of that over time, causes the inner instruments of knowingness stay with me a little bit. If you seem to be a little bit drifting away, stay with me a little bit. And if it doesn't make sense, go back and listen to some earlier chapters or send me a text or something. We can talk about it. We will be setting up a discussion group if there are people that are interested on this. It causes the inner instruments of knowingness, cognition, mind, intellect, ego, senses, to become purified. And essentially, it's the intellect and actually the subtle spiritual senses. What's the intellect? I agree, I don't agree. I know, I don't know. It's kind of the chopping block. You're on this side, you're on this side. That is still not an ultimate aspect of our being. And the spiritual senses. Now, we do have physical senses. What I was trying to describe in the last chapter is what I passed through when I began to realize that we have spiritual senses. Senses which are independent of the eyes, the ears, the mouth, the feeling, the touch, the hearing, all of those. Okay. So there was another great yogi, a really great yogi. Patanjali may have been, it may be the same person, we'll see. His name is Vedavyasa, a very ancient enlightened master, and he's the compiler of much of the literature and in the philosophy that comes from that part of the world, which, by the way, those of you from Pakistan, Vedavyasa is part of your culture. He lived in that region. He traveled in that region. This is the ancient knowledge that covered that entire part of the world. And he was one of the highest enlightened beings. How long ago? Long time ago. 10,000 or so? Long time ago. So what he says, he commented on also this. He says, when the yogin, one who is seeking unity, wants unity with God, gains proficiency, he achieves, maybe Vedavyasa was later. No, I don't think so. Anyway, when he gains purity in these inner instruments, then he has the power to know things as they are in all their aspects simultaneously without any sequence in time. What is he talking about here? No time is required to know. We go into town, we see the market, we see the city, we see the outskirts, we see our house, we see the different rooms. This is a different type of knowing, direct knowing. You know? How do you know? I don't know. You know. Okay? So verse 48 summarizes this, saying that this state of consciousness is Ritambhara Pragya, translated as filled with truth and bearing wisdom. So Vyasa says, so obviously Vyasa was later. I may be thinking of somebody else earlier. Sorry, I get my yogis mixed up. Go ahead and laugh at me. So he says this state means of Ritambhara, it retains and sustains knowingness, direct truth, with no misconception. The hidden divinity behind the universe is known, and complete knowledge of any object in creation can be gained. There is so much in here. And I've got some pictures of him in the book, which I'll put online. The ancient saint Vedavyasa. Is it clear yet? I know now it wasn't, but it was getting clearer. What he said explained many of the odd experiences in my lifetime. Normal knowing comes through our perception. What we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we touch, what we smell. If we read or hear about China, we have a limited concept of China and accept this as true. And then someone can tell us about it, we can read about it, we can see photographs, but do we know China really? No. So the second way, let me stretch things a little bit. You live there. Do you know China? Somewhat. But obviously the best way to know China would to be, although it sounds incredible, to be China, to be it. So there's a third way of knowing, which is direct knowledge. From or with, if you can say the object at the same time. This inner way of gaining knowledge by becoming one with anything. This is a complete way of knowing, depending upon how clear the consciousness, because in this state, the knowledge comes directly from whatever one's awareness is looking at. And this is a place that's beyond the mind, intellect, and ego. Yeah. There is something more. So we all have this ability in a latent form. This is what intuition is. But if our inner mind is impure, complete knowledge is obscured. Even with intuition, nothing is seen without bias or distortion. We know neither ourselves nor anything in the world completely. Reading on here, Patanjali is saying that there's no possibility of knowing the divine God with an impure awareness. Consciousness that is filled full of distortion. In the same way, it's impossible to see a reflection of yourself through a dirty mirror or out a window that's covered with dirt and garbage and so forth. An impure mind sees only a part of truth and never the whole. The divinity that we're talking about is beyond the mind. There is something beyond your mind. This is what I'm pointing to, Gregory. This is what I'm describing. And it can only be known at that experiential state. Our vision is like looking through a window which cracks open momentarily, but remains closed most of the time. We have some insight, even knowledge that comes through some kind of realization, insights, before this type of clarity, it's called Ritambhara, is obscured. It's colored by the limited mind. And this can also cause a whole field of distortion, which is known as Maya, Yoga Maya. So you can even have enough clarity that you can easily get lost in this experience, that experience, this insight, and without proper guidance. I'm talking about for myself, my friends. You could easily get off on some tangent. In a certain sense, the path we're talking about is like a razor's edge. It has to be tread carefully and with knowledge and experience. I think that I had been, in this book, I've been dazzled many times by what other people might think are flashy experiences. I admit it. And I certainly know now that I'd been confused by my own clarity, lack of clarity. And I was coming to realize this is why I was feeling so depressed in the last chapter, even though there was tremendous clarity and bliss that only a really true spiritual being could lead one through these rocky shoals of spiritual delusion, confusion. And I have to admit, this is scary. And I asked myself, did I really ever have the personal guidance of such a being at this time, 20 years? My original teacher, the Maharishi, said, you need to go learn about devotion in that Sanskrit message that I got from him. I left that organization. Bonnie Rosen here, very, very good friend of mine, still lives in that community. A wonderful, wonderful group of people, absolutely sincere, and a wonderful place to be. This is a community out in Iowa that I lived at for some time. I had to ask, did I really have that guidance? This time, no. I wish I did, but I didn't. I can think of the sexual and money scandals that seem to be plaguing the spiritual communities. And now at this time, of course, the U.S. communities, even up to the highest position in our country over the years. I mean, this is not the first time. These have happened with supposedly advanced teachers, Gregory, and I completely agree with you. There is plenty of space for skepticism about that. Listen, plenty of space for skepticism about that. Is it really real? Is it an ego that is trying to make Gregory? Yes, I understand that. Even those claiming to be self-realized teachers, gurus, have been lost in what I would call here, what I'm trying to describe here, Yogamaya. And I've met some of these, and honestly, in some cases, thousands, even millions of people can follow and such teachers, and they can get good benefit from that. Doesn't mean that progress cannot be made. It's kind of like the person that is on the higher steps above you on a staircase can help you to that step. If we haven't stepped to the highest step, remember the analogy in my early life where I saw this huge staircase when I was a college student, went all the way up into transcendental space. It was an analogy of my mind showing there's a lot of steps here. Wonderful experiences could come, dazzle them, leading them to some insight. They may remain dazzled by genuine experiences, but at that point, substantial progress could be halted. Okay. So Vedavyasa here in Patanjali was saying that the knowledge in this insight, this specific kind of consciousness called Ritambhara Pragya, wisdom, knowledge that sees it, is not limited in that way. And I had to ask myself, on seeing that, is my inner vision completely accurate, not limited by time, space, or circumstances at this time in my life? I don't think so. Not yet. In fact, I can't tell myself when that yet happens. There is a solution to this, but I had no idea what was happening. But there are periods of clarity I was going through. Since childhood, my normal mind always found it difficult to accept kind of this revelatory wisdom. Even when some scenes and events of the future, which I had seen, came, I kind of pushed them to the backside and denied this insight. And actually, that was a good thing. Certainly, I experienced confusion and insight and what we called some getting lost in, see, when the consciousness becomes clear in these early phases, you can have anything you want in your mind. And it can be a true insight. Is it a completion? Ask yourself. I'm asking myself. This book mostly was written for my own edification. Later, I decided that maybe I should share this. So although this insight was given long ago, apparently to me, it had taken many years to purify my awareness. And this explained why sometimes I could in my life I could look into and feel in the soul, the mind, the intellect, even in some cases the past history or karma of another person, and know something. How did I know? I had no idea. The only other person that I ever met at this point in my life that appeared to be able to do this was my first teacher, to some extent, although I didn't spend enough time really to clarify that. He seemed to, now I know the wisdom, now that insight, because he saw something about, some things about me that I had no idea. This was the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. The few times I watched him closely left me completely amazed. Whatever he did, whatever he said, somehow seemed to be perfect, at least from my point of view. What moved him was difficult to say. It was unfathomable and completely mysterious. And talking to people, his words were filled with not just the words, were almost magic. And so much done was really good was done. And millions of people took to that knowledge in a very little period of time. And I found those words very powerful. They entranced me. Not the words, the being. And so Patanjali here says in the Yoga Sutras that that type of insight of direct knowing is just one of many such capabilities which can come in time. And where I am living in Boone, North Carolina, on Heavenly Mountain, next to this huge retreat center of this amazing charitable service organization, Art of Living, we're beginning to actually come back to that now. Amazing. Such abilities rose in me from time to time and then stopped or faded. And each new kind of insight brought opportunities and also some pitfalls. This is another reason why I'm just sharing my own experience. Accurate guidance and direction is really important. Really important. Okay, you can have more happiness, you can have more creativity, all that you can have. But if you're looking for the deepest type of inner attainment, which was my goal, you really need someone who has been through all that path, knows it completely. And there's a name for that. A spiritual teacher, spiritual master, guru, true teacher. To have someone there who has overcome all of these snares of spiritual evolution, which there are some, and emerged out of that, I considered now the greatest personal blessing possible. And often I did feel at this time that I did have such direction of guidance, but actually I had no idea who it was. I often believed that I met my real spiritual teacher somehow on this experience so many years ago in a place which is impossible to describe, in a form like a crystal drop of pure consciousness. But, you know, I could only wonder, was this more confusion, delusion, clarity? It's been a long time. Someday at this point in my life, I really hope to answer that question. So when I was at the bridge at this wonderful retreat center in South Fallsburg, New York, I had gone through an experience where I was in a space that everything that I knew, remembered of my life, the entire existence was just completely wiped clean. And I had no idea who I was, what I was in the conventional sense. And I wondered about that for an hour or two. And then I came across that bridge. And then all of a sudden, this is the last chapter, and all of that rushed back into me. And I screamed at the top of my lungs because of the torment of realizing, putting the ocean in the bottle again. So anybody who is seeking higher life, skepticism is absolutely welcome. Questioning, because ultimately all of these things need to be personally verified for yourself to some degree. And if there's anybody who's giving knowledge, there are many great, wonderful, clever people who say wonderful things. Personally, I would look to all of those that are learning from such a guide. And if they are really living that, if they're living something that you feel is worthwhile and valuable, go for it. Okay? And give yourself time, because it takes time. It takes time. It takes time. Patience. So this is the end of chapter 13. I am going to come back. I'm feeling good. We traveled 4 or 5 hours here to get back here, but just talking about this, I'm saying gives me great joy to be able to share this. And chapter 14 is entitled, We Are Eternal Rivers of Love. Rivers of love. So I'm going to stop now, and I'll come back again for episode 21, chapter 14, on the process of living the enlightened life from my own personal autobiography and sharing called The Secret Journey to the Enlightened Mind. Join us again in a few moments. And if none of this makes any sense to you, let it be. I would encourage you to go back and, if possible, listen to what I've shared from the beginning, from episode 1 and onwards, if possible, or something that looks, at least go back a few times. I'll talk to you shortly. Bye-bye.